Telling the French president to don his moyen break is, admittedly, not the most sensitive piece of diplomacy to come from a British Prime Minister. Aside from scorning the country's wine and cheese, there is nothing more calculated to offend the French establishment than to disrespect the language by mixing it up with a bit of English. But Boris Johnson is quite right to raise his eyebrows over Emmanuel Macron's behavior since Britain, the US and Australia announced a new submarine pact, AUKUS, last week. True, you cannot expect the French government to be pleased about Australia cancelling a £47 billion order for French submarines. To see engineering jobs taken away from France and be transferred, in part, across the Channel will have rattled Macron. For the past 5 years he has acted with determination to try to make sure that Britain suffered from Brexit. Jobs were supposed to flow from Britain to France, not the other way around. But nothing justifies the French president's petty behavior ever since. He made a great show of withdrawing French ambassadors in the US and Australia, but left his ambassador in London not because he especially valued cross-channel relations but just so that he could try to make out Britain as not an important enough country to raise a diplomatic protest against. Now there is talk of France trying to retaliate by withdrawing from NATO, an alliance of air, sea and land forces focused on the defense of Europe. It would be deeply regrettable if the French stopped taking part in NATO exercises. But then the alliance coped quite adequately without France for more than half the Cold War. President de Gaulle withdrew France in 1966 and it did not rejoin until 2009. What right does Macron have to object to Britain establishing its own submarine pact when he was quite happy to see Britain ejected from Galileo, the EU's satellite global positioning system project? That decision was ostensibly taken on the grounds of security, implying that because Britain had decided to leave the bloc it couldn't be trusted on matters of military cooperation. Why, then, would the French president even want to be part of a submarine pact? If he thinks he can't trust us not to tamper with the EU's GPS system, surely he wouldn't want to trust our navy to have any access to French submarines. Macron's reaction is one of a man beating his chest because he feels he has been slighted. There are perfectly logical reasons why Australia cancelled its order with France and went in with the US and British instead. The submarines on order were diesel-electric ones, generally inferior to nuclear submarines, which can travel far greater distances and remain hidden for much longer, which, after all, is the point of a submarine. Moreover, there is a long tradition of intelligence sharing between US, Britain and Australia through the Five Eyes alliance set up in the depths of the Second World War and also including Canada and New Zealand. France did express an interest in joining the alliance during Nicolas Sarkozy's time, but it never happened. So why suddenly get worked up just because the US, Britain and Australia have decided to share submarine technology? I guess that Macron won't be too worried about Johnson's exasperation over his behavior. He wants to stir up cross-channel relations because he is still desperate for Brexit to be seen as a failure. But he ought to be concerned about some of the voices emanating from within the EU. The Danish PM, Mette Frederiksen, for example, warned the French government from ratcheting up tensions between Europe and America. Having seen Donald Trump depart the White House, EU leaders had been hoping to re-establish warm relations with the US, something put at risk by escalation of the dispute. Much as they might wish it were otherwise, all European countries remain dependent on the US for their defenses against aggression by Putin's Russia. It isn't going to go down well, especially in the former Soviet bloc countries of Eastern Europe, if Macron compromises European defenses over an argument over a contract. It is a reminder of one of the reasons why Britain voted to leave the EU, so that we could act individually in our international relations and not be hamstrung by disputes that had nothing to do with us. AUKUS is a shining example of Britain's new way of doing things, internationalist and free to forge alliances with other countries as we see fit. Other EU members will be taking a keen interest.